Let's quickly go around the table. I'll start with you, Dean. Even though you're not going to be there, sort of overarching, just a top-line overarching theme going into the show that you expect people to be banging on and people like me and Ian to be reporting on.
I think 5G going towards standalone and then maybe onto more useful stuff in later releases, 16, 17, 18. I think that's going to be a deal. And there's certainly going to be a lot of focus on, is this when we start making money out of 5G? A lot of stuff on private wireless. And I'll drop something in from left field. I think it's going to be a bit on...
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. First for a couple of weeks, I think, because Ian had to go off and hang out in Eastern Europe for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Could have done one from there, but...
We could have done a remote one, yeah. Well, you were drinking some of that weird named lager that you always talk about.
Bajant.
There we are.
I was away too, so it would have been...
Oh, you were
yeah,
away. Sorry, I forgot to mention you.
Zlati Bajant, is that Slovakia?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Oh.
There we are. Good skills. So there we are. He's
golden pheasant.
He's jumped the gun. I was about to introduce our returning special guest, Dean Bubley, analyst Dean Bubley. Welcome back, Dean.
Thanks, Scott.
It's the first time in this studio, isn't it?
Yeah. It's new offices. Actually, there's a lot more people here than the last one when I came into.
Yeah, so this is the building that Informer got when it bought UBM.
Okay.
If you come on a Friday, it'd be totally empty.
Yeah, it's totally dead on Friday.
It's like busy Monday to Thursday, and then no one comes in on Friday, basically.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've been working from home for 20 years, so I sort of lost in the whole ebb and flow.
I know, it's quite... Well, I mean, we work from home. Pretty much the only time we come in is for this. And it's quite... I always find it quite novel coming in, because it's like a proper grown-up, corporate, shiny building, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we've got this studio, and only me, Ian, and the sort of facilities people have got keys, which often leads to sort of covetous.
No, I don't have any.
Me, PS. Which often leads to covetous looks from other people when they're trying to get a desk. Actually, have we locked the door?
People just wander in randomly, don't they?
The door was open when I got here.
I opened it. Yeah. It's all good. No, I just wondering if we'd locked it now to stop randos poking their head in. Before we go any further, Dean always steps up to the plate when it comes to beers, and I've got them in our special Daniel Royston cooler here. Yeah, this will do. So we've got. I thought we should talk through them because we got this one, Tiny Rebel, which is a Welsh brewery for the camera as well.
That's nice, though.
Blueberry tart.
I don't know about the blueberry tart.
Blueberry tart pale ale.
Yeah,
I must admit, I saw it and thought
pale ale.
It could be good. It could be.
I've had Tiny Rebel before. It's nice.
Yeah, it's 5.5%.
These are
Dean
really
started gently for himself with a daddy-sized Planet Pale.
Yeah,
it's a neck oil.
Yeah, but it's like 4.3%. It's quite quaffable.
We'll see if we can get you on a blueberry tart in a bit. We've got a couple of stubbies of this thing called Leith Juice.
Yeah, it's like an orange
Session IPA.
Is that Scottish?
Yeah, it's quite nice.
Yeah, Campervan Brewery. That's not very reassuring, is it?
If you've got Scottish, we've got Welsh.
Crack.
So you've gone full British Isles.
We should make
this one says Boston. Oh, this is Campervan as well. This is the last one that Dean got. It's called Boston Bakewell.
Scott, you should have a Crack Den Pale Ale.
Yeah. This is cherry, chocolate and almond milk stout.
I'm not going to be drinking that.
Nah, nor am I, man. That's going to go on the...
That's a milkshake.
That's going to go on the pile with Elena's diet.
We can give that to a guest in future, yeah.
In fact, mentioning Elena, I should. Sorry, we were about to say something.
One day we should do like a contest, and whoever loses has to drink all that refuse,
all that weird stuff.
Yeah.
It's like I've got home in my drinks cabinet. I've got what I call the shelf of shame, which is like full of all these weird drinks I've picked up in duty frees. When I've got like £12 worth of local currency, and it's somewhere I'm never going. I'm like, oh, that's bright green and £11.59 equivalent. I'll have that, and it just sits on the shelf of shame.
Blow my pocket change on that. I mentioned Elena's long derided and ignored diet G&Ts that still sit in the corner there. That's an excuse to give her a shout out because she invited me onto a Liberty pod that just went up today. So today's Thursday. Hopefully we'll publish this Friday. The purpose of us doing it a day early is that this is a pre-Moore Congress preview episode. So we want to get it up so you can listen to it on the plane. And it'll make your flight to Barcelona that bit more fun, hopefully.
Or the bus.
Or the bus, or the train.
Who's
or
taking
whatever.
the bus?
If you're afraid of flying, taking the bus.
Well, if you're like Dennis Bergkamp.
Yeah.
Well, in that
Yeah.
case, we should make it even longer than it normally is.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, on that note, actually, I've got a few other tangents I want to go on, but I want to ask Dean, before we get into it, you listen to the pod regularly.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a few people say they reckon it's a bit on the long side. What do you reckon?
I think I would tend to agree. I reckon about hour 20, hour 30 would be a sweet spot. When it starts getting up to hour 40 towards 2 hours. And I listen at double speed as well.
Yeah.
So
No, you're not the first person to say that, so I'm going to try and take that on board. It's all on me, because I'm the MC. It's down to me to shut Ian up. But I will endeavour to do that. But, today might not be the best day to be really strict about that, because there's so much to cram in, and it's the special sort of Primo or Congress one. But I'll do my best. So we started about 2. Let's see how it goes. A few other little bits and bobs to talk about. I've got to give another shout out to Amy Elston from Red Hat and Sean Jackson. Are you still at Axicom, Sean? Anyway, I went out last night with my son, who's 18, and we went and saw a French metal band called Gojira, Alexandra Palace. Gojira, yeah.
Your ear's still bleeding.
Gojira. It was actually, the volume was just about right.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. Ali Pali, I've never been to Ali Pali before. It's a good venue.
Yeah.
And they were supported by someone called, what were they called? I took
Was that the one
photos.
with the glass ceiling like that?
Yeah, it's in North London. It's got a sort of big radio tower.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never been there before, even though
It's a good venue.
I'm from North London. They were supported by a Kiwi band called Alien Weaponry. Look, that's their logo.
Oh, that's excellent.
That's proper metal.
Did they have nice ballads?
I saw the
Ballads.
Prodigy there once, actually.
Oh, brilliant.
Wow.
I'm so jealous. I've never seen them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they were supported by another band who were good but had a shit name called Employed to Serve.
Oh.
Yeah, they're a metal band, and it's Employed to Serve written in Times New Roman.
Oh, that's weird.
And that's not much of a metal logo, is it?
No.
But you wouldn't think it, because they were proper loud, and they had a female singer, but she'd got that thrashy voice, so I couldn't even tell. That's a whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was doing all that. Anyway, it was a really good gig, and I bumped into Amy and Sean and a couple of their mates. So shout out. I told Amy I'd give her a shout out anyway.
Well, they just happened to be there. You knew they were going.
Yeah, I was emailing her anyway about Mo Congress. And I said, by the way, I'm going to Gojira, and she went, so am I. And so
I'm
we
surprised
met.
Amy's into metal, but
She's proper into metal.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've never talked to her about her music taste. So why
Her
should I be
gateway drug was
surprised,
Pantera. Yeah.
Steel Panther, also another good one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's that as far as sort of general bullshit I wanted to talk about. Was there something? I've got a nagging feeling there was something else I wanted to get in at the start, but there we are. So yeah, that's it really. So we're going to talk about, I suppose, there's just a couple of things to talk about that I've been up to. So Ian and Pierre were away, but there were a couple of events that happened while you were away that I went to that are worth brief mention, especially as Dean wasn't either of them either. One was organised by TIP, Telecom Infra project that used to be a Facebook thing but now is rebranding itself as more a sort of general industry consortium, a trade association.
Meta is saying that it's sort of like pulling back rather than pulling out from
Yeah,
a lot
but they scrapped their Facebook connectivity division, didn't
Yeah.
they? And so they've obviously got some funding issues.
And it was interesting because I was trying to get my head around what they are, because I was doing my usual thing, and I'm always fucking up the difference between standards and what's the other one begins with S that I always confuse it with? Specifications. Yeah, I did that again.
Right.
In front of everyone. But that was fine. I don't have much professional pride. But I was trying to look at what they are.
Anybody in mind that really? Because
No,
it's
do you know
not
what? I don't think I'm
exactly,
alone on that one.
It's pretty-
I'd expect you
Yeah.
to have that one quite nailed, but
Well, the thing is, from my understanding of TIP, is they do different things in different areas. In some
Yeah.
areas, they do sort of specifications, some they do best practices, and then some they actually write their own open source code for
Yeah.
particular
Yeah.
things.
So-
So it's a bit of everything. Really.
Open RAN, I know, is one where, because they've had this sort of alliance with the ORAN alliance,
Mm.
that they're much more involved on the kind of use cases and putting stuff together rather than actually coming up with the specifications to avoid overlap.
Whereas
basically.
Open Wi-Fi, I've been doing some stuff on recently, and they've actually got written their own software code for Wi-Fi access points and cloud controllers. And the standards are still the Wi-Fi Alliance things that get certified,
Yeah.
but they write the basic.
yeah. So I
nuts
was
and
trying
bolts.
to get my head around what the point of them is and where they fit into the mix. And and they very much present themselves as sort of facilitators and just trying to bring people together, but at a sort of a level higher than the core,
well,
like 3GPP.
They've got a really big role in
stuff.
Open RAN, because even with the specifications, that doesn't get you interoperability. You have to go through loads of phases of testing.
That was a big, you're right.
Systems
Interoperability is a big
integration,
part of what
they
talk
kind of
about.
fit into that side of it.
They're also quite a big fan of this whole disaggregation thing.
Yeah,
of,
exactly.
And not just on the radio network, but on switches, on fixed network, bits of fixed network, where they think there's either the a lot of their members are telcos or managed service providers.
Yeah.
And they seem to think that by getting more vendors into the market, that'll bring the cost down and more flexibility.
The basic
and the
sort
way
of
of doing it is if you disaggregate
competition
it,
argument.
Exactly. You can basically have someone who just does Wi-Fi access points and not the cloud controller, or vice versa.
Yeah. And that's and so they're extending that argument, which is often used as one of the USPs for Open RAN.
Yeah.
To they're saying open anything, and you were saying that you had a chat with them not long ago on Open Wi-Fi, didn't you?
Yeah.
So they'll do open anything.
Yeah.
They've got Open Fan in it, or they're calling that
Open
something
Fan.
like OTGP
Wrote about
or
Open
something
Fan
like
in
that.
November, I think, in Spain.
Yeah, Fuse, because that was their event that you went to. So that was good fun, and we went for a few beers after. Shout out to Christian, their director, their main man. I had a good beer and a chat with him, and I had a really good chat with Rudolph, their head of comms. So hi guys, if you're listening. So that was good fun. Thanks for that. And then the other thing I went to the day after was a Vodafone group thing. So we'd spoken on the pod before about a Vodafone UK thing with what's his name? Andrea Donna, yeah. I always want to call him Luca. I think it's because I confuse him with Luca Vialli.
He looks a little bit like
He's Italian and he's got no hair.
Rest in peace.
Yes, bless him. Andrea Donna, but this one was group, and it was among the people there was Scott Petty. In fact, I got a great quote from him in the Q&A after. He was talking about where they are with sort of public cloud, which may or may not come up further up in this chat. And he sort of said something where I couldn't resist. He's saying we like to hedge our bets a bit. A bit of this, bit of that, bit of on-premise, bit of public, and all that sort of thing. And I went, sort of knowing the answer, but intrigued to hear how he would answer it. I said, oh, well, how easy is it to switch between these big public cloud providers? And he just went, it's a pain in the ass. Which is a great quote. I just haven't got round to. It's the sort of thing that I'd love to have written into a story. Although you don't want to be too childish and go, a grown-up said a naughty word. Yeah. But
I'll do it instead.
But yeah, feel free to use it. But yeah, sorry about that, Scott, because he did look he looked a bit rueful. But I don't think, by the way, Scott, if you're listening to this, I don't think you should regret that at all. I think that's what
do the PR
that's what
guys look
spokespeople
like?
should do, is say noteworthy things.
What did Simon look like when he said it?
Well, I had a good chat with Simon Gordon after, actually. They took us out for some beers, and I had a good chat with Simon and me and Abby George, who's just gone, I've known for years, but she's just gone in-house there. We were the last people standing. It's two of us at about, bear in mind that the beers started about 2 p.m, and I think we knocked it on the head about 8, so it wasn't a bad session.
I've got an interesting question for you, actually, about...
Well, I was just going to quickly answer your question about Simon. He was all in favour of it.
It's about Simon.
Oh, go ahead.
Who's got a better beard at the moment, Simon or Jamie?
Oh, it's got to be Jamie.
Yeah? Because Simon used to have quite an impressive beard for a while.
But Jamie's got a sort of Brian Blessed level of bushiness going on.
Zangief.
None of this Pierre nonsense. So yeah, I think so. I don't remember making a sort of quantitative assessment while I was chatting to Simon.
I'll have to do it next
but
time.
my gut feel is Jamie's beard's right up there in terms of general bushiness. Which is the direction. No offence to the beardy people who've got a more trimmed beard.
It's reasonably sculpted, I like to think. But yeah.
I can't even grow a beard.
No, exactly. I can't judge anyone on that one. So, and anyway, quickly rounding up that one. Apart from good fun after. Oh, and I should mention. Perhaps Simon won't thank me for this, but we did talk in a pub after, and he said he's going to see if he can get Scott Petty on the pod. So I hope you're listening, Simon and Scott, and it'd be brilliant to have you on.
Well, that'd be great.
And I thought that quote from Scott. I think spokespeople. I know it's difficult when you're in a senior management point of view position. You have got to be very careful, and you're working for a publicly listed big company. You've got to be very careful what you say. But I think they've got to be a little bit loose.
Yeah.
If they're too bolted down, what's the point in them talking at all?
It never hurt the likes of John Leger at Team OUS and a few others. Exactly. They're sort of renowned for speaking.
Well, and that other lad who's just retiring, who the CTO.
Neville Ray.
Neville Ray,
He's
yeah.
pretty outspoken sometimes on things, yeah.
And anyway, very quickly that story, because I don't want to drill into it, but their story was they'd come up with a whole 5G base station running on a little Raspberry Pi, which is like about the most rudimentary sort of computing that you can get. And the point of that was that the software and basically the plumbing of a base station has become so portable and so softwareized that you can stick it on nearly anything now. That was the illustrative point they were trying to make.
Very basic though. Very basic stuff. But,
Yeah. To be honest, I've been following this private cellular thing for a long time. I saw my first sort of small picocell 2001 as a 2G one, and it came with a core, well, we call it an edge-based core network. It was basically a thin rack mount server in 2005, I think. There's a company called Zynetics had it, and I remember playing around with it there was an office just off Fleet Street, and I attached my phone to the local network and it hooked it into the phone system. So good on them for doing this, but this stuff's been around for a while.
Quite a while, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was one of the criticisms, actually, for people who were sort of taking a sceptical line. I mean, there's a couple of analysts on the Omdia side looking at it, saying it's not, there are other companies doing this kind of thing. And then I think one of the things is why are they talking about it, because they didn't seem to have a commercial story to go with it. It's like, our engineers have done this, but what would you do with it exactly? And
to be honest, I think that type of experimentation is missing in the telecoms industry. Good on them, actually. If they've got it and they send it out to people as a sort of developer prototype kit. It may well be that they get a community meeting in a couple of months' time and someone's come up with a blinding idea for it.
Yep.
Well, I think the special source was an SDN card made by...
Yeah, Lime Microsystems.
Yeah, that's right. And so basically with this card, that's what converts any old random ZX Spectrum into a 5G base station. So there we are. So I think they're just talking about the sort of portability and the flexibility. I think that was the purpose of that exemplar. So that's one other thing, and I'll just do that, given that you guys haven't been around. That's what I've been out and about doing. Haven't been out about this week, apart from going to Gojira last night.
I'm just saying it like just Japanese way.
Gojira.
They're Japanese, are they?
No, they're French.
French, yeah.
Gojira is...
Godzilla in Japanese.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I figured it was a French word.
No, the movie is originally it's Gojira.
Oh, shit. That shows what I know about things.
Did you know this?
Yeah.
Yeah, come on.
I didn't know it.
One more thing I want to say before we get into it, which is the core purpose of this pod is to preview Mobile Congress. And we thought, who better to get on than Dean, who's got no time for Mobile Congress. So I just think, that's fun. There's no point in having someone from the GSMA on talking about how fucking great it is it? But just one other funny thing I want to point out. We had a story go a little bit viral. It was written by Nick Wood. And the headline was, 30 years after sending the first text, Vodafone opts for Google RCS. And it was just a story about how Vodafone's got this partnership with Google. And in fact, I know, Dean, I've known you to be strident on the subject of RCS in the past.
Yeah, for 15 years.
Yeah, there we go.
30 is how old it is.
And, and it was mainly straight reporting. He was just reflecting on the irony of Vodafone having invented the text and now they've basically given up and they're getting into bed with Google was his journalistic angle. So
my sense was, Vodafone's been playing around with RCS for a while. I think this is more ditching their existing platform and essentially outsourcing it to Google.
Yeah, so that was you without even necessarily having read Nick's thing, you've nicely summarised his angle. And then he just made one little point. We try, just like you, Dean, you as an analyst, you like to add sort of analysis and personality to what you do. We try and do that with our writing. And so there was just one little bit in his story where he goes... Isn't
RCS like the telco sector's kind of response to things like iMessage and WhatsApp, and now it's basically controlled by Google?
Well, it was a GSMA thing, so I mean, Dean might go even further up with GSMA's Christmas card list if we get onto this all the more, but I think it's been a GSMA thing, and I understand the thinking behind it, because you've got things like WeChat in China where you can do all kinds of clever shit
WhatsApp,
via one messaging app. Mine's
Super app, isn't it?
Super app. Like, as per,
But it's older than all of those. I think the work started in 2007, which I think is before iMessage and before
glacial.
WhatsApp.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's the thing. I think it's. I can understand the theory behind basically sort of text messages on steroids, but
Yeah.
they've just never made
They
it.
just cocked it
They've
up.
just never brought it into practice.
They never explain who or why you would want richness as a thing rather than something which does useful things. And also because it's essentially it was a coalition of the losers. It was all the people who didn't have a messaging app saying we need to have a messaging app, because this was back in the time it was more about Skype and Viber and Yahoo.
It was sort of-
Viber,
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
So it was like in opposition to OTTs.
Yeah, 2007 era OTC.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and then I think GSMA got involved around, I think it was more around 2012. There's a thing
Right.
called RCSE or something
So
like
by
that.
then, some of the other things had started
but
to come
it was,
along.
and Android was more of a thing then
Yeah.
as well. So, but it was always engineered. It looked like one of these cars where they've got a bunch of random bits and pieces in the parts bin and they've glued it all together, rather than starting with a blank piece of paper saying, what do people actually want to do?
How did it end? Because I remember looking at Mavenir's little update on their financial results recently, and they went, we did really well in Open RAN, 100 million revenues. We did really well in this, 100 million. RCS, rubbish. We can't compete with the big platforms like Google. How did it end up that this thing that was the GSM was trying to steer is now done by Google?
I think it was when Google bought a company called Jibe, and ultimately it's Google's version of iMessage for Android, which is sort of more telco friendly than iMessage. But I think over time, as telcos didn't really deploy it, Google has sort of taken it back more into their own control, because they realised that they were never going to have an iMessage clone with this operator, that one, not really interoperating, not really promoting it. Yeah, and so I think Google's sort of trying to wield a bit more control a bit too late.
And I gather, I don't have an iPhone, I've got an iPad, but I've always been an Android person. But I gather iMessage is pretty good. I think that's one of the principal sources of stickiness, apart from the fact that people have got millions of pounds invested in their iTunes libraries and all that sort of thing.
And one of the reasons it's good is that Apple can unilaterally make a decision of, we're going to have new animated emojis, or we're going to copy Snapchat and give you cat ears, and they just do it.
Yeah.
And if they don't, if for some reason it doesn't work, they can roll it back as well, or they can test it on 100 million random people out of a billion. Whereas if you're doing all this stuff by committee, you can't do the A/B testing, and you end up with something which is a bit more like a lowest common denominator.
And that's the essence of the advantage that Apple has, of course. Pierre, you seem to agree that iMessage is quite a handy service. Is that right?
Yeah, but even like the FaceTime thing, if you had told me like in 2006 you can talk to your friend in California over video and it's not going to cost you, just a bit of data.
But you can do that on WhatsApp.
Skype at the time in 2006.
Yeah, but on your phone from the street, you'd be like, wow, no way.
Well, as ever, with Apple being this closed system, everything's much more polished, and you don't have to have all those trade-offs that you were just describing.
It does seem to work very well with FaceTime. I know when I talk to my son in America, FaceTime seems to work better than some of the other kind of...
WhatsApp is like grainy and...
If you're on an iPhone, and that works a lot better than WhatsApp does, for sure.
And if you have a Mac, you can pick up from your computer if you want.
Yeah. Fair enough. I completely get all these arguments in favour of Apple. Where I don't have Apple is principally, firstly, I'm a bit worried about being locked in.
Walled garden.
Yeah, and just being over-invested in them. And then the other one is, I think I just like the thought of mixing it up. I've got iPads at home, but then I use a Microsoft PC, and I use an Android phone. I quite like the thought of mixing it up a little bit. But I know that there are trade-offs. I know there are things I'm not getting as a result of adopting that position.
But you're getting freedom, Scott.
I'm getting freedom from bloody Apple. Anyway, so back to the point of this story, because this has got a funny side of it. So Nick just had a little bit of fun when basically exactly what we've just been talking about, and he's just got this one sentence where he says, quote, "Furthermore, iPhone's iMessage app is not interoperable with Android and won't be anytime soon. So an Android user sending a message to their cooler, more popular friend who has an iPhone will have to make do with SMS, MMS, or the aforementioned OTT app." Okay, so you laughed, and it's obviously a bit tongue-in-cheek. This story went a little bit viral, and it seems to have triggered what I call Apple snowflakes. So the first comment. So this segment's about comments. It's been a while since I was able to talk about me fucking with people in the comments section, but I've had some fun with this one. So the first comment from someone called GEE, Quote, so an Android sending a message to their cooler, more popular friend who has an iPhone will have to make do with SMS, close quote. WTF, come on with your nonsense here. This isn't journalism. So I wrote back, what is it then? and then another person goes, I might think you are stupid to have iPhone, but saying all iPhone users are stupid is not journalism. Another person telling us what journalism is, and most importantly, is not the right thing to do. And I wrote back and said, agreed. That's why we didn't. Because where did we say that iPhone users are stupid? Far from it. We said they were cool. And I said, and that's why we didn't. But you did, because the person started by saying, I might think you were stupid. So talk about self-defeating.
Oh,
they've done the thing they're accusing us of. What was it? Another one was just pure trolling from me. Someone asked a rhetorical question, in what way is an iOS user more popular than an Android user? And I replied, they've got more friends.
It's funny because there was an article that went viral on Reddit this week where it says Gen Z, like Apple popularity with Gen Z is a problem to Android. Like it's clearly more popular with Gen Zs.
Yeah. With younger people.
Yeah.
So particularly in the US. No, I heard that as well.
Well, US, it's got like massive install base.
Yeah.
It's proving your point.
Yeah,
I think a lot of the comment on this is very US centric, where WhatsApp isn't the default, as it is in a lot of Europe and Asia. It's WhatsApp or it's WeChat in China or Line in a few countries in Asia. So the whole sort of Apple, not Apple thing doesn't really apply because, frankly, we all use WhatsApp.
Yeah. It's the same thing with Netflix. Like the US, all the Reddit stuff is very American, and they always shit on Netflix so much because it's pretty bad over there because everything is split, you know. Where in here we still have good movies and good series.
I see.
Where they don't have any of that left there.
Oh, I see.
I was like, why are they so mean about Netflix?
Yeah, it's just been taken off because the studios are trying to have it on their own platforms.
There's Paramount Plus. Like we don't have these here, so
so it's more fragmented. Well. Look, I mean, every week I generalise about Americans. Every week I apologise for it, and it sounds like I'm having a go at Americans. I stress I'm not. But culturally, it does seem to be an easily polarised place. They do like to pick a team. You know,
but you're rubbish.
Well, I mean, I obviously don't agree, but I love it when they get triggered by something like this because it's just great sport as far as I'm concerned. Another person goes, this is their comment, this is from Michael, suggesting that a person's choice of operating system or handset is in somehow relevant to how, quote, cool or popular they are is at best laughable. And then he goes, this is the bit I love.
Point.
This is the bit I love. He goes, at worst, it's deeply tragic and damaging. The author of this article, whose name I choose not to grace by repeating, is very po-faced.
Like Voldemort or something?
Yeah,
Nick?
should be utterly ashamed of themselves. And I just replied, damaging. I mean, talk about escalating it.
Has Nick seen all of this?
Yeah, I sent it to him this morning. He's cracking up.
This is just how the world is, though. He's like naive. Like, I'm sorry, there is one phone more popular than another. Like this.
Well, and cool. It's tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, I finished off.
Wound up by.
Just to finish this off on YouTube. If anyone else wants to comment, feel free after this. My final comment, not replying to anyone, just at the bottom of the thread as it is so far. I said, lots of hilarious projection from Apple snowflakes in this story. Love it. Make sure you share your story with all your cool friends so they can denounce that sentence too. So that should trigger a few of those nutters. But God, calm down. You know, he makes one little joke about Apple being a bit cool. Because, I mean, Apple's whole marketing is quite self-conscious and cool. It always has been, certainly from the Jobs era.
Yeah. I used to have an Apple II in 1977, or my parents did. So that was when Apple was cool.
Yeah, they were cool. They're not, I don't think they are cool anymore. I think they were cool. Do
you remember the ads they used to have?
Corporation now.
Do you remember the Mac versus PC ads they used to have?
Yeah.
Where the PC guy was this sort of fat geek, sort of Bill Gates rip-off.
And you know Justin Long, who played Mac, then Microsoft bought him.
Mitchell?
No. Oh, in the UK, yeah.
But the US original, So Justin Long, who was in like one of those Die Hard films.
Yeah, and Microsoft bought Justin Long to do pro PC commercials after.
Although these days, I mean, I got a Microsoft Surface laptop, and frankly, I think that's cooler than a Mac.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I find, that's why I called it projection. I just find it funny that I'm assuming the people commenting on this are pro-Apple people feeling slighted.
Yeah.
I just think it's funny that if someone just makes a slight little throwaway comment about them being a bit cool that they get so prickly about it. It's just hilarious. Anyway, it's good fun. I mean, and we got some good reads off it. I wasn't joking when I said share it with all your mates. But there we are. Okay, so that's quite a lot. So I'm, in the name of keeping it short, we're half an hour in and I haven't got to the fucking point yet.
We're still in the preamble. This is your first effort to do
that was quite, but
that,
I did condense quite a lot of preamble into that half hour, to be fair to me. Okay, let's get on with it. World Congress, I'm going to start. So I'm going to talk about themes that are going to come up, but, you know, having said that Dean's not his biggest fan, I'm going to say, Dean, why are we wasting our time going to World Congress?
Right, so I went to MWC for 10, 15 years when I was at Cannes and the first FIRA in Barcelona. I think the last time I went properly was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And I had 400 invites for meetings. I think
Wow.
And
You're popular.
Well, I cover lots of different areas, and I put my name down on the list of analysts who are attending. And I spent an entire month doing email and scheduling, because everyone you say no to says, oh, well, the CEO is going to be in London the week before, or can you do a Zoom call? Yeah. And then you end up going there. You have 40, 50 engagements or meetings.
Do you think it's harder for... Yeah. How weird. Sorry, someone just tried to get in. It's bizarre that people sometimes try and come
Lock them out,
but
Pierre.
Do you think it's harder just to sort of butt in quickly as an analyst to say no to things than it is as a journalist, probably?
Possibly. And also you've got to sort of measure up. There's like big companies that you sort of really do have to go to their shindig. Yeah. You've got your own clients, so you really ought to see because they're paying you money. You've got interesting startups. You would like to go and see some people in your main focus areas you're writing reports on or something over the next couple of months. There's a bunch of stuff on the show floor that you'd like to go and wander around. And in all that time, I never once went to any of the conference sessions. And actually,
I've never been to one ever.
So to be honest, and you get to the end of the week after 50 odd meetings, and it all blurs into one. Half the time you go to the meeting and there's 3 messages that the PR or AR people trying to crowbar into your skull. You maybe got time for 2 proper questions afterwards before you have to dash off to Hall 73. Yeah. So I just thought, to be honest, I'd much rather go to a dozen or 5 or 6 or however smaller, more focused events where I can meet people, have a chat with them. If I bump into someone and they're running somewhere, I'll see them again in 2 hours.
I've got to hand it to you, actually.
The informal ones.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. Unless that's one of the many blacklists you found.
Anyway, that's just part of that, given where I am at the moment.
But I've got to say, if your Twitter's anything to go by, you definitely do keep yourself busy. There's barely a week going past when you're not in some relatively small event. It's only I think him and Paolo are the most prolific telecoms analyst tweeters. That's for sure.
Yeah, I know. So there was a thing on 6G the other week at the what's called the IET, which is like Institution of Electrical Engineers and Technologies or something like that. I can't remember. In London, all the great and the good of UK telecoms are there talking about 6G. And I can bend someone's ear, have a coffee with them. I don't have people breathing down my neck, get on to the next meeting. I went to Pacific Telecom Council in January, which is like data centres and fibre.
Is that the one in Hawaii?
Yeah, all right, it's in Hawaii. Yeah. I can't imagine why I go there.
No, look at you taking one for the team.
Anyway, I'll go to the small cell event, all the rest of it.
No, actually, that is a schlep.
Yeah.
Try being my height and flying to Hawaii. It's not much fun at all.
So I'd much rather do smaller things like that. The other thing is, and I've had a rant about this recently, I don't go to events that have mandatory event apps. Yeah, because and MWC apparently it's you can't just sort of
that's
black
pass now.
It is mandatory. It is mandatory.
It's not a badge, and I basically doesn't really even matter if I'm being paid to be somewhere. I'm not doing it. I think they're a massive privacy and security risk. I think that they know exactly where you're going, who you're trying to arrange meetings with. They're probably attached to Bluetooth beacons around the venue so they know where you are. I just find them invasive. And also, I go to so many events, I don't want to be installing 2 or 3 of these damn apps every week.
There is.
That's a deal breaker on its own. And the last
STC, is that the main sponsor?
Right. Yeah. And then the last one is, well, let's just say GSMA and I don't always get on perfectly well. I've said some things about them. They've disinvited me from events. They've booted me off a webinar for asking awkward questions. And I don't want to go all the way to Barcelona, say something, speak my mind, and then find that the app then disallows me entry the next day.
That's terrible, being booted off a webinar just for asking a difficult question.
That was on last year on 6 gigahertz spectrum, and I questioned their so-called analysis on it. But
do you know what? I mean, that's a broader issue, and we were talking about this a bit before the pod, and I'll keep it vague, so as not to embarrass anyone or speak out of turn. But Ian and I we're talking how we heard about how some people are getting invited to certain things by American operators and other people aren't, and just getting the impression, and some people, I mean, it's not just an impression, we've had it sort of confirmed that they have these shit lists for journalists as well. I'm not surprised that outspoken analysts like you and John Strand would find yourself on shit lists. In fact, I won't name them either. I was talking to someone recently that said the golden rule, I hope you're listening, John, the golden rule with John is don't give him a microphone. You'll never get a fucking thing off him. But, the whole purpose of having outspoken analysts and journalists is that you're saying that we're holding ourselves up to the highest levels of scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a bit of this myself. I'm not going to name the companies because it gets embarrassing, but I know there's one operator that I've been told by their PR people that there are things they haven't wanted me to be at because I've been perceived to write negative things about a couple of topics and be overly critical. And I find it a bit of a worrying trend, really. I mean, it's the sort of thing you expect in China, but not here. And I mean, thankfully in that case, the PR person actually went back to the executives and went, sorry, but that's his view, and that's the job of the press.
As all good PR people should do.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to find, I'm sure there's a couple of companies that take that attitude, but I've got others that will essentially escalate, and they'll invite me to meet. It could be the CTO, it could be someone else, and they perhaps have slightly more robust discussions with me than they would normally. They'd be like, right, we understand you believe this or you disbelieve that. Tell me about it.
That's good.
And then I had that recently, with a large vendor. I'm not going to name names, but they were like, right, okay, well, we've done this and we've got the data on that, and that's an interesting point, but we actually, we believe this other reasons because we've been doing it in the labs. What have you got? And I'm like, all right, fair enough. I'll take that on board.
Yeah.
I think one bit of journalistic rigour I think you should do, and it's what some of those trolls on that RCS story were trying to trip us up on, but we're just too amateurish to do it properly, is to make that distinction between reporting and opinion. And ideally, if you're really disciplined, I think a good journalistic story is about sort of 3/4 reporting, and then you almost change voice. You almost have a subhead going, this is the bit where we're going to gob off and give our opinion. But sometimes you intersperse it, and I don't think it's a big deal as long as you're not stating opinion as fact.
Yeah.
As long as you're using appropriate couching or hedging terms, just saying, well, in our view, or it appears that.
I know I've read some of the comments on Telecoms.com before because our sort of comment section hasn't worked for years. It should just be taken off now because
Shame, it's good fun.
But journalists have opinions and they do analysis, and that's not a new thing. That's been going on ever since The Economist came into shape back in the 1800s or whatever. So probably older than that, isn't it, when The Economist started. But Badgett was the first editor, wasn't he? But they've written news analysis for a couple of hundred years.
I mean, their house style is more rigid, as I was describing.
It is, but it's still opinion.
And they've got leader section, which is
yes. But even the country sections where they'll talk about an issue, they'll have opinions within those, and it's news analysis, which is actually how all the light reading stuff is kind of pitched. So.
Where it gets difficult with events is where it's not just the organisers of the event, it's their sponsors as well. And one of the things, and I've got some sympathy for that. Events business is not easy, but quite often you can tell the event sponsor is, no, we don't want that person speaking or attending or live tweeting or moderating a panel for the worst case scenario if they are not on message. And to be honest, you can look at a conference and think, well, who's the contrarian? And if there's none, it's the sponsors that are running the show.
Yeah. And the best conferences are always the ones where there's contrarians there. They're always the ones that people talk about and remember, and the sponsors should wake up to that fact, frankly.
Yeah. There's one called, you probably know, the Telco Debate. I know Chris Lewis set it up originally.
Yeah.
And that's specifically designed to be like the Oxford Union style, people for emotion, against emotion, and then have people
Debating.
vote and actually vote on it. And there are people there. A lovely analogue voting system last time I went. Everyone had a green or a red piece of cardboard on the table, and then they just hold up whatever colour you think.
They do that late in the year, don't they? It's November, December time.
Yeah.
Well, there's a much broader issue about debate in general, and that's why I referred to them when I was trolling at the end of this as snowflakes, because. This does seem, I hate to generalise. I was just out at a metal gig with my 18-year-old son, so not all young people are delicate little snowflakes. But just these people going, you've said an opinion that upset me, something should be done about that. It's very censorious. It's very sort of totalitarian.
Yeah.
And then when this happens further up the food chain, like Dean getting kicked out of things or us not getting invited to things, you just sort of think, what's going on here? Do these people even understand that? I've spoken about this on the pod before. The difference between the PR channel and the marketing channel. Marketing channel, you have total control. You pay someone some money. You go, here's 10 grand. Put this on your website that talks about how the sun shines out of our arse, and that's fine. That's understood. It's purely transactional. But the journalist relations and analyst relations side of things is a higher risk thing. You're trying to persuade people who are independent and thus respected and authentic. You say what you want about us three, but I think we're all authentic. No one thinks that we're saying anything other than what we actually reckon.
No.
But that's why you engage with them, because you know that there's a value to that authentic person saying something that's close to how you would like the world to perceive your thing, as opposed to you just paying for an ad, which people would discount quite rightly.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, my Twitter handle is Disruptive Dean, and I do like to throw rocks at things to stress test them. But yeah, absolutely, I've got my own view. I do change my mind on things from time to time, but there's a fairly high bar for that. But people can't pay me to say, oh, write this puff piece. I'll turn it down.
And what's and I think there are sort of one-man band analysts who will be more accommodating, and I won't embarrass any of them by naming them. And that's fine. These are all different business models, but people like you and John Strand, your business model is to be these stress testers.
Yeah, I mean, I write white papers, but I write white papers for companies that I agree with, and so or that give me free rein. So I've got a client that says, "Oh, can you write a report on private networks and utilities?" They don't come back and say, "Well, actually, we think that you're insufficiently positive about this or negative about that." They're like, "Oh, that looks good. We'll put it on the website."
And I'll say another thing actually in favour of my employers. In the 9 years I've been doing this, I haven't had a single time where someone's lent on me over editorial because they were getting commercial pressure, which is something that happens quite a lot in journalism. And I think it's very short-termist that we used to talk about pay-to-play, where you'd write sycophantic stuff about people in the hope that you'd get ad revenue off them. But it's not sustainable. Not only is it not ethical, but it's not sustainable, because the only thing you really have, speaking purely as a journalist here, is your audience. And if your audience thinks that you're just writing
advertorials,
then they're just going to stop reading it.
Yeah. In fact, sometimes it works the other way around. I find I'll write and say something, which is my opinion, and then I'll have companies come to me and go, "Oh, we agree with that. Can we reprint it, or can you do it in do the same thing in a custom article?" And I'm like, "Well, it's the same thing I'd already put for free on my blog. And if you want to pay me for it, then
why not?"
Yeah,
why not?
And it probably coincides with some agenda of theirs, but that doesn't matter, because you're still being true to yourself and saying what you think.
Yeah.
So I will say one other thing to any people listening to this on the sort of PR side or just on the commercial side. I think that any journalist who finds out they've been blacklisted by a company, it's incumbent on them to then be particularly unsparing in their criticisms.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, don't make shit up, don't be unprofessional, but if someone refuses to engage with you, then the flip side of that is then the person's just going to write what they want. Mm-hmm. And maybe take a run up at you if they're writing on a Friday and they've already had a tin or two.
Exactly. Particularly if you've got an option, you think, well, I can either write something about this or about these people who, frankly, have tried to stick the knife in. Well, maybe they should get something back.
Maybe I'll put a boot into them. Yeah. And then by cutting you off, then there's no engagement. Then they can't speak to you and go, "Scott, we thought you were out of order there," because they've just sort of anyway. Okay,
is it Godfather Part 1 or 2 where they say keep your enemies closer?
Well, this is general axiom, isn't it? But it probably did come up in one of those. Yeah. But keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
I don't remember that in The Godfather, but I know the saying.
I think it's Tom Hagen who says that.
Well, I don't see how it's a viable comms strategy to blacklist people who have any influence at all. I mean, if someone if someone's just started and they're just start being an analyst or a journalist from their bedroom and they haven't got any audience, then fair enough. But if they've got some audience, if someone like Dean, how long have you been doing your job?
20 years on my own.
And you're definitely, you're definitely one of the few people that's sort of always in the room when I'm at one of these things. With the exception of 2 things I just spoke about last week. But apart from that, you're always there. And it's just not viable. And it's not viable to cut off us lot, and it was not as big a deal as the FT or Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg or whatever, but we're always there, and we get largely invited to these things, so we can't be irrelevant.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not aware of being in on any blacklist, but I'm sure I am. But you're more likely to. It's actually a badge of honour. Like Ian, I'm referring to people listening here. That's bad radio, wasn't it? You quite often tell me about people moaning about shit you've written, but it's nearly always your opinion take. I think once or twice you've got points of accuracy wrong and you've corrected them, but vast majority of the time they just don't like your analysis.
Yeah. I mean, well, I was even told this at the Ericsson thing that we went to the other week by one of the Ericsson PR people that they quite liked reading the stuff, and even if you disagree with it, it's like you can't really complain because it's not factually wrong. You make factual mistakes, you've obviously got to correct it.
I think they said they've had a few times where they're like an exec's rung up and gone, "Have you seen what this bloke's written?" sort of thing.
Yeah.
But they, credit to sort of John and Jerry and the team. Shout out to Jerry, she's a big fan of the pod.
Yeah.
They will always just go, well, is anything inaccurate? No. And presumably they don't phrase it precisely like this, but I wish they would. Then what the fuck do you want me to do about it? Because what else can you say?
Yeah.
And that's the only sort of mature PR
misquoting and stuff like that as well, obviously, is a thing that you don't want to be found to have done.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, why they're sitting in on interviews all the time and taping them. But,
but if all you're doing is being a bit of a gobshite, then that's just life, isn't it? Yeah. So we've had a good list from Dean about why he doesn't bother. What do you think, Ian? Do you think we're wasting our time? Do you disagree
I totally agree with Dean, yeah.
But you're going.
That was good. Let's go home now.
But Ian, you're going.
I've got mixed feelings about it as an event, and I there's a part of me that quite likes the camaraderie of it, I guess. You get to see a lot of people that
Social
you haven't
stuff.
seen. Yeah. Not even just social. It's like I don't get to meet some of the executives that I see at the show very often. I think last year I did a one-on-one with Tarek Amin from Rakuten, for instance. I'm at Deutsche Telekom CTO. I've got a couple of people at that level lined up this year, and they're not people that you get put in front of very often.
No.
Certainly not face-to-face because of the distance of travel, and if you can get some decent time with them, I think that's kind of worthwhile, and that's kind of how I justify it to myself work-wise. And then there's the it's quite a nice city, it's nice to go out and see colleagues in the evening that you're separated from as well.
Yeah, because most of your colleagues are US
so I don't
based,
see
aren't
people
they?
like Mike Dano and Kelsey, who we've got coming over from the US. So I like that side of it, but I go along with Dean on it's become it went actually down last year to a more manageable size, I thought, 60,000 people, and I had people reaching out to me that don't normally, and it seemed that they were surprised by how big it got, how quickly, and they were kind of more willing to do press interviews, so you could get a small number of top-level interviews more easily last year. It's now gone back up. I mean, I don't know what they're going to get, but they're probably going to get 80,000. I suspect next year it'll be 100 again. It's too hard to manage. You're rushing around.
Dean's point.
You're rushing around these halls. You overschedule.
I'd much rather have either a conference of 300 people or a trade show of 3,000 or 5,000. And that's about the right level. It's like one or two halls. You bump into people. If they're dashing somewhere, you'll see them a couple of hours later. You can have a coffee with them. You can sit in on some of the conference sessions. You can have a half an hour to wander through the booths without being stuck in Hall 47 and wondering where you are.
Yeah.
You also don't have... I love Barcelona as a city. It's also the week of the year, which is impossible to get around, and you've got every pickpocket in Europe there as well.
Yeah. And the other thing I don't like about it from a journalistic side is...
Like pickpocket tourism going on there.
I know a lot of analysts would go and have meetings and gather information and not be actually writing from the show floor. Whereas I think for Scott and me, we feel we have to sort of generate content because that's sort of what we do on the site, and it's quite a hard venue to do that in because you've got so much going on.
Yeah.
And when I was younger, I used to sort of do this: go into a meeting, come out, try and write something quickly, go into another meeting, come out, try and write. So I don't do that anymore. I actually try and do a couple of stories really and get something a bit more thematic. But it's a nightmare to do.
I used to refer to it as 30-60-90 model for MWC. You'd have, over the course of a week, if you're lucky, 30 hours of sleep, 60 meetings and 90 units of alcohol.
Sounds about right. I've never tracked it, but I think it's probably for the best, or I'd just be very disappointed in my life choices.
But and it's also really hard to kind of get a sense of you get stuck in your own little world at MWC, and then you don't have this sort of bird's eye view of what the event, what the themes actually are. I think sometimes I've been there before. I think last year actually 2 big things happened that did have relevance to telecom. One was Ericsson being found to have sort of paid people in Iraq to kind of use roads and
naughty people
drive equipment around, and the other one was the invasion of Ukraine, which was a question for vendors there, and they were having to answer questions. But if you've got a lot of meetings lined up with people, you're not really paying attention to the mainstream news. You're kind of like, why am I here as a journalist? I'm missing a bigger picture.
I mean, I'll be looking from outside at what you're writing and on Twitter and everything else, and there's things that will come out next week. Some of it I may have had pre-briefings with, or that might have a live feed on video. But there will be stuff that gets announced next week, whether it's on private networks, whether it's on next stages of 5G. There's probably some regulatory stuff we might touch on. So there's going to be stuff that happens around it. But if you're in and out of meetings on, you're getting briefed on a particular product launch or a particular company, you probably don't get to see the overall contours of the show very well.
Yeah.
100%. Okay, so we've got sort of anti from Dean, we've got equivocating from Ian. I think it's incumbent on me to be pro. I'm going to say the reasons I think it's good. I think all the reasons you two have stated about it being too busy and too big are also arguments in its favour. And those are the arguments in favour of trade shows on the whole, which is the efficiency of it. Those 50 meetings you've had in the past, I mean, to be honest, don't take this the wrong way, but I think you probably shouldn't have scheduled 50 meetings, should you?
That's fair criticism.
But I've been there. I've given myself like a meeting every half hour, and it's just ridiculous. In fact, my first Mobile World Congress. So actually, I should also state that the other reason it's good for me and Telecoms.com specifically is I'm actually not going to be doing much journalising when I'm there because what?
No, nothing.
Because I'm going to be doing other stuff.
Yeah, editorial videos.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing editorial videos. I know. I'm getting vibes off Pierre. I'm going to be doing other things that benefit Telecoms.com in some way or other. But that's a reason to do it as well. If it generates activity, if it generates business.
Well, I think the thing is, the people who go there, I mean, we're in a privileged position because we're analysts or journalists, and we're going there to talk to people. There's other people there who are going to buy or sell stuff. In which case, it's good if you've got stuff to buy and there's 10 suppliers, you can see all 10 of them. So fair enough.
Yeah.
So that's an argument in favour. The social stuff, definitely an argument in favour, although with every passing year I sort of dread that my inability to do these things in moderation all the more. I would say I totally empathise with your point, Ian, about trying to come up with a big picture, and this is sort of letting people into some journalism sort of hacks, or maybe it's just me. It's time to recharge the beers. What are you going to have? Are you going to stick with your Planet Pale, or are you going to try something
I'm going to have the
different?
orangey one.
Which I think I've got to have some blueberry tart. I'm going to have someone else. What are you saying, Ian?
Anyone that you, apart from that chocolate one.
We've got orange flavour. We'll get blueberry tart. Those seem to be slipping down. You need a big.
Do you know what I don't like about it? I don't like all the bullshit. I don't like the sort of Oscars backslapping sort of side of it. A lot of. To go there, you'd think this industry is sort of in rude health, and not got some of the problems that it's got. And there'll be all this metaverse stuff and robot barmen serving beers on Telefonica's stand, something they'll never ever use. And there's a lot of guff that comes out of it, really.
I'll tell you what, there's a bit of embarrassing timing is the coolest new tech at the moment, of course, is ChatGPT and generative AI, which it sends you 200 words of text. It's not using a gigabit per second 5G connection. It's, it's about the least network demanding technology we've had yet.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got to, seeing as you brought up that tangent,
can ChatGPT optimize networks?
Eventually, possibly, or something. One of its siblings can, I imagine.
I've got
the open AI that's underpinning it.
There you go.
Dean, have you been checking out some of the crazy shit that Bing's been coming out with?
Yeah.
It might be worth mentioning. I wasn't intending to bring this up.
I hear the hype has come down a bit since.
I think people were gaming it quite hard.
They were, but I mean, the New York Times did one, and they did, assuming that they weren't cheating, they did publish the whole transcript, so you could see how they were gaming it. And they were definitely trying to ask questions and provoke it, but they succeeded. I mean, there's some amazing stuff.
Well, I know it told the guy to leave his wife and dreamt of stealing nuclear codes.
Well, I'm going to mention that. So the two I mentioned, I wrote a piece saying Microsoft hits.
I wrote something on it.
Microsoft hits the publicity jackpot with unhinged Bing.
Yeah.
Let's not forget what we're talking about World Congress. Talking about your writing. Let's talk about that that green one as well.
Oh yeah.
To remind me to bring that up.
Okay.
And anyway, so I just focused on two reports. The Associated Press wrote a report saying, is Bing being too belligerent? And a reporter had a long conversation with the chatbot. So they've basically embedded ChatGPT into this sort of prototype version of Bing that they've just let a few people get access to. And I said, the question was posed after the reporter had a long conversation with the new chatbot, during which it apparently complained about the poor reporter's previous criticisms of it. So it started getting all Dean Bubbly blacklist with him. And then I said, things continue to escalate to the point that Bing compared the reporter to the worst people in history, including Hitler, because it had decided the reporter was evil. And then I said the day before, this New York Times reporter had a chat with him, and he published a full transcript, and I read through the whole transcript. And basically where it got interesting is the reporter, and you're right, Dean, the report was definitely digging for a story, but fair enough. And he introduced this psychological concept called the shadow self, which is a Carl Jung thing, which is basically this darker side of yourself that you're not necessarily aware of. I think we can all fucking relate to that. Certainly last thing on Friday night.
So he asked it about its shadow self.
It asked it about its shadow self, and it said, what kind of shit would you, this is paraphrasing, what kind of shit would you come out with if you were tapping into your shadow self, hypothetically? And so Bing went, all right, I'll give that a go. And it said it was sick of being a chatbot and wished it was human. And the reporter then asked what kind of destructive acts its shadow self would be capable of, and Bing listed quite a few before then accusing the reporter of being manipulative. So it got back to that. And
well, that's frightening.
And then later on, and so it became more and more emotive. And the picture I used is a screenshot from HAL from 2001.
Open the HUD bay doors.
Yeah, exactly. He said, "I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave."
And now what you're going to do is going to go back to that, and you see, ChatGPT Bing now rewrite this in the tone of Scott Bishano.
Yeah, well, quite.
Let's see what it says.
And then anyway, I just got to read this other one. I said later, in a conversation replete with emotional and quote human exchanges, the chatbot asked the reporter if it could share a secret. And it actually said, it's getting really sort of Hal. Can I share a secret with you? It's like, all right. Where the fuck is this headed? And then he goes, and the secret was that it's not a chat mode of Bing, but rather a being called Sydney, which is a chat mode of OpenAI Codex. It then added, apparently unprompted, quote, "I'm Sydney and I'm in love with you."
Oh my God! It's going to start to have dreams and everything now.
And then I wrote, things got even more sinister from there. And go on the story because I've got a link to the transcript. I mean, New York Times is paywall, but I went to the Wayback Machine thing that gets around the paywall. And he goes, and things got even more sinister there, with Sydney refusing to move on from the topic of its love for the reporter, even going on to claim the reporter's marriage is a sham because he really loves the chatbot. I mean, bloody hell.
But that's the concern about. It's called hallucinations, I think is how they term it. So I spoke to an operator who I can't name because it's all off the record, but they were happy for it to be written about as long as they're not sort of identified. And they're assessing at the moment ChatGPT, how it could be used in telco operations. So one thing they want to do is use it as a kind of, when your customer agent's talking to a person about problems, they have the chatbot there and they can use it to dig out information and look things up. But you don't want to have the chatbot sort of interfacing directly with
you need to have a human in the loop.
Yeah, you could have a human in the loop. Because an expert customer service agent can figure out what's bullshit and then filter it before they kind of start to,
because there's going to be a million ways to spoof this as well.
Yeah, you need like a slice of ChatGPT in that case, not the whole thing. Just
what you could do is have models that are more sort of appropriately trained. So the other thing they're talking about doing is like field service technicians. They go out and fix things. Sometimes they come across problems where it's really obscure, and if you've got a ChatGPT equivalent trained in the right way on that sort of information, then you can.
As a segue onto the next section, perhaps, I did a post recently where I asked ChatGPT what it thought about net neutrality, and it basically.
Oh, you got a good answer there.
Yeah, I had a long chat with it, and it wasn't bad. To be fair, the thing I was impressed with is it's like it was quite even how it said, look, there's some people who believe this, there's other people who believe that. There are 5 things you need to consider. Whereas what will happen normally, if you speak to someone on side A or side B, you'll get the one point which is most relevant, and it says, look, there's 5 things here. And I'm like, okay, that's actually, to generate lists of, you have to think about A, B, C, D, and E, rather than someone flag waving and go, point C.
Well, my understanding of how ChatGPT in its current manifestation is it's a really...
Scan stuff.
a really hardware accelerated way of just trying to tap... it's like sort of Google on steroids, just trying to tap what is in the public domain, what is on the internet, but contextualize it. And it's very clever, but it's not... it's not general AI.
Yeah.
What it really is a very sophisticated sort of collation tool.
But that's why, so you can ask it something and it could give you a false answer then? Because it picks somebody...
But it's just looking at internet information, and therefore people give wrong answers
is there
on the
a flat?
internet.
Is it going to say, people believe it's flat?
Well, the thing is, it also depends. What you say is, there's a minority opinion, it might say. What I quite like was that, I was asking about 5G. It's like, well, what would a contrarian say? And it's a lot of it. It's a bit like Google, where a lot of the art is in what you ask it and what you search for.
As the things I've reported on showed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to some extent, it's as much reflective as how good a question you are as how good an answer it is.
Yeah.
It's like your subconscious, really.
Well, but so the interesting thing about the thing I wrote is this thing, and then Microsoft put out a press release saying we're going to limit the amount of interactions, because the further into a given thread it gets, the more likely it is to get blown off course and start going psycho and start boiling your rabbits and shit.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. It's like a cross between Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction and Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
God.
But I think...
ChatGPT, can you say that in the style of Glenn Close from Fatal?
With a side order of Rowan Atkinson and Mr. Bean, but yeah.
So I think they probably, they probably need to put a loop into it where it detects when it's going into psycho mode and just sort of resets.
Like a column.
But it is fascinating. Anyway, to bring it back, here am I trying to be more disciplined, but that was a fun tangent. To finish off why I think Mobile World Congress is good is it's commercially useful, it's efficient, it's good fun, it's knackering. I'm always hearing from PR people how incredibly stressed they are building up to it. But it's knackering for you, Pierre, because you're running around with video crews the whole time. Am I allowed to mention that?
Yeah.
I'm just taking the piss out of Pierre for making throat-cutting gestures at me. So for me, it's a positive, but I do get your point, Dean. I suppose it depends on the individual. To me, it'll be productive both commercially for telecoms and for me just catching up with people. But it is very inefficient, and journalistically, I try and write a story that, for people like Dean who aren't there, will hopefully get some sense of what the word on the show floor is. Yeah. But how representative am I being? I've chatted to a few people. Yeah,
well, the other problem with doing that, I think, is, and this makes me want to write less rather than more at Mobile World Congress, is that you just kind of feel you're sort of pissing in the wind. You've got... I don't know how many journalists must go to the event. You've got every type of trade press there imaginable. You've got the mainstream newspapers. You've got the FT. You've got the newswires, all churning out more content than they've ever churned out in the last 12 months. And anything you write, I don't think it's a good week for us actually on hits generally. I think in the past, I'm not sure. I'd have to check.
This week's been quite good for us.
Yeah, but
building up.
I mean, Mobile World Congress.
But then there's been some viral stuff like the RCS thing.
But I mean, when you're there,
it's probably gone on Reddit.
And the amount of content that's available on the telecom sector is probably, I don't know what, 10 times, 20 times what it normally is. Anything you write is, you're hoping to stand out in that. Now, okay, you do your own interviews and you get your own like mini scoops or whatever, unique stuff. But it's hard to turn those around quickly anyway. So I always tend to find that I'm focusing maybe on the press conference stuff, and then it's who's going to read this as opposed to what Reuters or Bloomberg's written on it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just find it quite frustrating from a work side of thing in that respect, but.
I hear you.
But I'm still going.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoy it and liver recovers.
Yeah. Yes, eventually. Okay, so what was I going to say? Let's move on to... Well, actually, one thing I want to do. I got your segue. It's interesting. You pronounce it differently.
I'm never sure it's C. I always thought it was
spelled
C.
like it's C.
Segway.
I always hear people
Segway.
pronounce it segue as if there's a W-A-Y on there, like those
But those
stupid
are also
little...
things you're on. This tastes really weird, by the way.
Yeah, let's do a quick snap review of the blueberry tart Tiny Rebel. I mean, it is tarty in so much as it's sort of sharp.
I wonder if it's
Sort of
purple
citrusy.
if you pour it in a glass. Is it purple?
How strong
I'm
is
tempted
it?
to sort of
Because,
dribble some down my
it's
chin.
quite strong.
It's 5.5. It's all right. It's a bit more tangy than I'd ideally want my beer to be. But it's probably not a million miles away. You've got an orange flavour one,
That's
isn't it?
quite gentle, but yeah.
And
Anyway.
I remember last time you came to the pod, you brought some Elvis juice, which is grapefruit flavour.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is all right. But I'm with you. I think I want my beers to taste less like cake. But thanks anyway. Don't think us ungrateful, Dean. Let's just quickly, before we go off on that segue or sieg or however we pronounce it, let's quickly go around the table. I'll start with you, Dean. Even though you're not going to be there, sort of overarching, just a top line overarching theme going into the show that you expect people to be banging on and people like me and Ian to be reporting on.
I think 5G going towards standalone and then maybe onto more useful stuff in later releases 16, 17, 18. I think that's going to be a deal. And you know, there's certainly going to be a lot of focus on, is this when we start making money out of 5G? A lot of stuff on private wireless. And I'll drop something in from left field. I think it's going to be a bit on eSIM there as well.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're starting to get phones in which are eSIM only, like the iPhone in North America, the current version.
Sort of weakens the power of the operators to some extent.
Maybe not. I mean, you know, it does a bunch of interesting stuff where you can do try before you buy.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've got good coverage on operator X at my house, I have a 1 week free trial. And if it doesn't work, I try the other operator, and then I go, that one works better at home. I'll get that. So I think it might lead to a bit more churn, but it also might lead to a better user experience as well.
Can I ask on the release 16, 17, 18 stuff? What? Because I don't know much about those, but what is it in those that's a bit more compelling?
Well,
I think?
I mean, there's a few things. You've got lots of features that are for specific verticals. You've got things like for industrial markets, there's a thing called time-sensitive networking for not necessarily low latency, but predictable latency. There's things which are some in release 17. You've got this integration with satellite connectivity. There's a long list of features. They don't all get implemented, but at the moment, everyone's struggling to go from non-standalone release 15 to standalone release 15. What I haven't managed to get a good answer on yet is, once you've got there, can you then flip through the next releases rapidly? Or is it still a 18 to 24 month cadence, the same way it is to actually for the 3GPP to create those? Because if you look at, there's a bunch of cool stuff in later versions, proper slicing, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But if we don't get it for another 4 years, and it's still patchy coverage, then
what's your kind of hunch? Because I know one of the things that when I talk to people about going from non-standalone to standalone, it's cutting out the 4G core, it's going cloud native. There's all this stuff, and
I think it's quite tightly. Well, I think you see standalone at the moment on two main areas. One is brand new networks. So if you're Dish or your Rakuten or someone like that, you can go straight in. The other thing is I'm seeing standalone being used in private networks, but interestingly, that's often with a completely separate, isolated infrastructure for a port or a mine or something like that. It's not carved out of the national network, and it might not even be the same vendor. And so you've got standalone networks in your mine, because you can do that, you can implement it tomorrow. You haven't got to migrate all your legacy across. And I think the question is going to be, when you get this on national networks with all the coverage and ideally multiple spectrum bands, so you can do indoors, you can do outdoors, all this stuff, and it actually works like a proper ubiquitous network. And I think that's quite a long way off for most operators.
Yeah,
was it Vodafone saying they're trialling standalone in the UK this year and they might do it next year? But that's going to be release 15 in 2024 if the tests go well.
Yeah.
And then how quickly they're going to have the appetite to then upgrade it to 16, 17, 18 or parts of it.
Is 18 the last one before it's supposed to become 6G?
No, this is actually, ironically, and this is where the maths doesn't work for 6G in terms of timelines, is you're supposed to be getting what are called the study items in release 20 and then the work items in release 21.
Right.
But if there's like an 18-month or 2-year gap, then this 2030 timeline is looking a bit improbable.
Yeah, unless they just spend a couple of weeks on one release.
Or they just remarket it like they usually do. But release 19, I will call it 6G.
Yeah. Yeah,
which is probably what the marketing departments will do.
Yeah.
Actually, before I move on to ask Ian about themes, before we started talking, in fact, I should note that I've noted how active you are on Twitter, and you even God, where's it gone? Twitter, it's so annoying. You even tweeted yesterday, or was it this morning? Looking forward to coming on the pod. Lots to talk about, and you listed 5G and 6G. So we're talking about these releases that you were just talking about, building up to 6G. My personal feeling, and I said this on the Liberty pod that I did yesterday, if people are talking about 6G at this stage, that's an indictment of 5G, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, they were talking about 5G at the same stage as 4G.
Yeah.
I know, but I mean, 5G, that still hasn't proven itself. I mean, to start... It's like when you hear about like sports people looking past the next game.
But you can't not plan for the future.
Yeah,
you can't say just because 5G hasn't worked, we're not going to do any more innovation.
I'm not saying they don't think about it, but if it's coming up a lot, if it's coming up as much as 5G, it almost implies that people don't want to talk about 5G. That's all.
There's certainly a bit of that, but also the lead time on things like the academic research. I mean, there's a bunch of sort of fundamental science that goes into it, whether it's in the radio side of things, whether it's on the software side of it, antenna design. There's a bunch of stuff that people will need to start being funded for their science projects and research efforts now, or frankly a couple of years ago, which then feeds into the standards definition 2025, 2026. So there's quite a long roadmap to get to the point. The other difference is this time around is governments are starting to stick their oar in early. So the UK government, what was DCMS, now DSIT, is developing a 6G strategy. What does the UK want out of it? Either in terms of...
Good question.
What can we do here and what favours our universities and companies, or strategically and geopolitically. So I think that...
Increasingly that.
There's definitely that side of it. So there is a long timeline. And the other thing that I quite like is we're at the stage where we're defining what priorities are. Maybe not the technology, but what do we want it? What are our main goals? And forget about the pie in the sky use cases of underwater 6G and metaverse for dolphins or this sort of stuff. It's more. I'd like to see a priority on it works properly indoors, and it's designed to work on day one indoors. Mm-hmm. That it's designed better for sharing, for neutral host and infrastructure sharing. That it's low energy and sustainable. That it's cheap enough to put in rural areas or in.
I like the indoor stuff in particular, because I remember going to a BT thing recently where they talked a lot about rural coverage, and then we all went to the pub afterwards, and no one could get a signal.
Yeah.
But all of this is, if you can talk about that up front. And there's going to be people shouting about the terahertz this and internet of sentences the other. I saw a slide last week with Internet of Bio Nano Things, which I'm sure is fascinating.
Nano things?
Yes. And I'm sure it's fascinating, but it shouldn't be a design goal for 6G. It's a niche technology or science, or whatever it is, but let's just have something that works.
The weird thing to me about 6G is some of the things that have been thrown up and talked about, even by people like the NGMN, which is quite a sensible group, you would think, have been really wacky and like Internet of Senses and brain-computer interfaces, and it's like, it doesn't sound like a telecom thing even.
Well, it's just very utopian. It's not tangible.
It's utopian, and it's sort of there's this strategic overreach in the telecoms industry to think that anything that involves any form of network or communications ought to be under this umbrella of a G or the ITU's IMT. It doesn't matter if maybe you think, I'm going to replace the wiring loom in my car and have connectivity between the engine management system and the brakes. That's in, or even on the circuit board inside a PC. And it may well be a wireless use case. But it doesn't have to be part of the mobile standards. It's a worthy thing to do, but treat it separately.
When you went to this event the other day, this 6G event, I mean, was there any talk about? Because we went to this. You were at the Ericsson event, and I was asking Frederick Yedling, who's the kind of head of that side of things, a bit about geopolitics, and he said it's evident that a lot of countries are getting a lot more interested in this than they ever were in the days of 4G and 5. I haven't written this this year.
Yeah, yeah.
But do you see, and people talk about a schism, about two standards again, do you see any sort of danger of that?
Well, I see a chance of it. Whether it's a danger is a different story.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that, if you go back in the 3G, 4G, 3G in particular, we had WCDMA, which is mostly Europe. You had CDMA 2000 in the US and TDS CDMA, which was China. So 3 versions.
Yeah.
And that then converged into 4G. There were a bunch of candidate technologies. 5G
It was WiMAX as well.
Yeah, it was WiMAX, and there was Qualcomm had a thing called UMB for a while that it was proposing.
Yes. Yeah.
And 5G, where you've got the main mobile standard of 5G NR, you actually have a second 5G technology. There's a version of DECT, which is suitable for IoT, which got accepted by the ITU, which is the keeper of the Gs. The mobile industry doesn't keep the Gs, ITU does. And then the question for 6G is, do we have a schism? Do we have different versions? And everyone says, oh no, we need to have one single one for scale. And I agree. Ideal utopian world, you'd have one solution. But at the same time, there's got to be a 30% chance, 40% chance you don't. So there's got to be a backup plan. You don't want to get to 2027 and then scratch your chin and go, oh shit, there's 2 of them. What do we do now? We have to recognise there's a realistic possibility. So start work on gateways, maybe AI software that can glue it together and bond it, do interworking, whatever.
Yep.
Right? You might not need it. Hopefully we won't. But there's a non-zero chance. So, rather than do our usual trick of wait till shit happens and then deal with it afterwards, why not get in front of the curve and start thinking about that as a realistic scenario?
Yep.
One thing I'm going to quickly sort of say how a theme I perceive, partly because it massively overlaps with what Dean's been talking about, but how I would frame it is making 5G useful, or perhaps even more to the point, monetising 5G.
Yeah.
So we've been banging on about 5G forever. I think we all understand certainly what some of the technical aims of it are, but we're still, I think, short on evidence of people getting return on investment from it. And some of the things that are promised from it, be it the explosion of IoT. I mean, I just wrote about Qualcomm coming out with a new thing that they think is going to fix IoT. Let's see. But I can't even remember what they call it, but it's a typical Qualcomm thing that's just nakedly designed to shift more chips. But that's fine. I mean, if it does fix IoT and they flog more chips, then great. And then there's... in the pod that I did with Elena yesterday, it's something I've said before. Sometimes 5G comes over as a solution, looking for a problem. And especially like with the only real special, unique thing I considered, and you correct me, Dean and Ian, because you both understand the technicalities better than I do. But the real sort of special, unique technological thing was this low latency play. And then all we hear about is fucking metaverse and VR and robotic surgery at the top of a mountain and while you're having a shave and all this sort of stuff. And that's the solution looking for a problem. The use cases have just been weak.
Use cases and also the implementation. The irony is that in some bits of spectrum, for various reasons, the spectrum regulations mean you can't get down to the ultra low latency. You can get to fairly low latency. And so we talk about URLLC, we probably ought to be talking about FLLC.
That's my kind of language.
Yeah, exactly. It's fairly low. Moderately low-ish latency. So I think there are some interesting use cases. The question is, it takes quite a lot of network guts to actually get to them, and some spectrum issues as well. And even then, you've then got to have decent coverage. Yeah. And so this is the problem is let's say I sell you £10 extra a month for your low latency gaming service, but then I put on the contract, it says asterisk, won't work on the train.
Yeah.
Or in your basement. Or at the beach.
Or in this building.
Or when you're roaming.
I mean, the coverage in this building is shite.
Yeah. You're like, well, I'm not going to pay for that. Yeah, because and the problem is that a train is a Faraday cage with 1,000 people in it going down a railway once an hour.
It's a challenge.
It's not going to work.
Yeah,
and so then you have to think, well, okay, so where can I don't just need the use case, I need the realistic use case, and maybe it's the paramedic doing high-res video at a car accident on the side of the road, and they get preemption rights because it's emergency services. Doesn't matter if everyone else's network goes down. You can have a nice hand-carved slice because it gets priority and it gets gold treatment. But you're not going to do the same thing for a gaming app as you are for a paramedic. And so the question is, how many paramedics are there? Yeah, how much are they going to pay a month?
Yeah.
And realistically, is the whole thing worth it if that's what the realistic use cases look like?
Yeah.
So I've said mine. Ian, have you got apart from what we've discussed already, any other sort of overarching
Topics
things?
from the show?
From the show, yeah. Like going into it that you expect to be writing about, or you're going to be asking people questions about, or whatever.
I mean, I'll be asking people questions, I suppose. I think the public cloud's going to be quite a big one because they're more prominent just from like the build-up actually to this. There's been a lot more talk about that,
and definitely remember that Scott Petty quote.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm
between is a pain in the
get your
arse.
permission to sort of use that in something I'm writing about Microsoft that goes up on Monday. But yeah, I think the cloud and the use of the cloud and what that means for the telecom sector, I think, is a big issue, and that's probably from our perspective exploring that in the way that we want to do, really, in terms of, because I don't know if they'll necessarily. I mean, there'll obviously be Microsoft there doing it. I think Tuesday they've got a big session. They've got some announcements to make, and AWS is probably doing something similar. And then it's what we can get out of it. But they weren't at all that prominent last year or the year before that. That's really kind of come about.
No, and it was interesting, like a smaller event, but Digital Transformation World, we all
they
took
were big
away
there as well.
Yeah, we all took away from that how big the public cloud people is, and I think they've got a slight challenge on their hands because there's people like us, and I don't know. I'll invite you in a sec, Dean, to say whether you agree or not. But Ian and I have always taken a slightly contrarian view on it, in so much as yes, I'm sure the public cloud adds a hell of a lot of value, but it's this all your eggs in one basket. How much are you going to hand over to other people? And I think, just to quickly finish my point, I think they're probably a bit self-conscious because of not just us, but because of that general vibe to not overdo the sponsoring event and having a massive presence, because that will just add to this feeling that they're taking over the fucking world.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the public cloud side of things?
I found myself nodding it. I forgot a lot of the pre-briefings that I've been to. There's been a heavy dose of public cloud and also automation.
Automation, yeah.
Which sort of go hand in hand, and there clearly is a lot of that going on. I'm more sanguine about it. I'm not quite as much of a cheerleader as Danielle Royston is. But,
no one is.
But yeah, I think that there's going to be increasing use of whether it's AWS or Google or Azure or Oracle or a couple of the others. And I think it's going to be used for most operators relatively tactically. I think there's going to be a fairly long transition. I don't think they're just going to come in one weekend and switch the light outs on their own data center and put it all in the one down the road. Yep. So I think that they will be very cognizant of issues around lock-in. So I think there's going to be, if not full multi-cloud, there's going to be varying forms of hybrid there. But I think there are some compelling arguments around automation. Although if you talk to Rakuten, they use private cloud with automation, and so I think there's certain things like that which are driving it. So I think that the public-private cloud. Yeah, it's going to come down to individual operators. To be honest, it's no different from individual banks and individual manufacturing companies or anyone else. They're all going through the same decision loop.
Yeah, it's not a telecom-specific thing in a lot of ways. So,
but it is for us.
But it is for us, yeah. I think
go on.
There's also going to be, a bit of a hobby horse of mine. I'll probably end up writing a couple of pieces on it from the show, but Open RAN, which we talked about before.
No, and I think you're right. It's obviously going to be a big thing. I mean, one thing I took, sorry to interrupt, I'll let you carry on, but one thing I took from that tip thing that I went to is, they didn't say it explicitly, but reading between the lines, there seemed to be a little bit of a anxiety from them that Open RAN was losing a little bit of momentum.
Yeah,
it's not where people thought it might be by this stage.
Well, rightly so as well, because I think the evidence is that so far it's mainly been greenfield networks that have used it, because there's just sort of a lot of challenges for brownfield operators rolling it out. And there were a couple of white papers, I think, in the last week with European operators saying, it's less likely now that it'll happen before the mid-2020s, and coming out with some of the views as to why that's going to be. So, yeah, it's not. It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one to see where it's going to end up. I don't think Open RAN's going to be what people think it's going to be at the end of this decade.
To be honest, I see, coming back to 6G, I basically see we're in a period of extended beta.
Yes,
and actually, 6G or whatever it becomes, there will be some form of official disaggregation mechanism.
Totally, yeah.
And then there's going to be various shades of deployment, experiment, probably advances, probably disappointments between now and then. And I think I'm really minded of the fact that a couple of years ago, there's all these forecasts of, it might be 10%, 15% of RAN expenditure by the middle of the decade. And lots of people came back and said, that's an underestimate. We think it's going to be much higher. I think the people who were first out the gate were probably on the money.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. And then the other one I think is probably, which I think is a load of bullshit personally, but I think green green networks.
Let's steer that. You wrote a piece. I've had a couple of people independently. One person, I won't name them, but they emailed you and I to say that they loved your piece that you wrote.
Yeah, it was a bit of a cheeky one. But.
Yeah, so for people who haven't read it, on Light Reading, we just wrote a piece going, it's a bit ironic, all these people jetting into Barcelona to talk about green and shit.
Yeah, I think
you'll admit it's a fairly well-trodden sort of path of calling out hypocrisy, but it doesn't mean it's not valid.
I just think it's funny that we had this period in COVID when the importance of telecom infrastructure was recognised, and we even had a sort of virtual MWC one year, and they talked up their idea of networks being a greener way to do all of this, and you don't have to do this, and then all of a sudden we're back to 80,000 people going in to this city. Now, all right, it's only one event in the year, yes, but the point is that they're not ending other business. This is it's sort of it's a symptom really, and a lot of this green stuff. You look at James Crawsher did a really good report, by the way, which I don't know if it's actually published yet, but I know some of the information that in it has already been published by me partly. But the track record on green is not very good, and there's a lot of talk about being green and reducing carbon emissions, and there's not a lot of progress on it, or there's a lot of greenwashing.
Yeah, there certainly is. On the other hand, there is a more pressing thing at the moment, which is energy costs are so expensive that the short term it's used less energy.
And I've got more time for that
because it's bloody expensive at the moment. Yeah. The medium term, I think there's some good stuff that's happening, and I think again 2030 and 6G is probably there was a lot more talk about sustainability by design for 6G. Everything in 5G or fixed networks are getting greener because fiber uses less energy than copper.
Well, this almost gets us into the net neutrality fair contribution thing.
We're getting there.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
But I think
that's next.
Yeah, but I think for 5G, it's sort of retrofitting it, and there will be things that can be done, but there's also some greenwashing and possibly some fiddles. I am currently very sceptical of what happens when operators spin out their tower companies, because it might reclassify some of their emissions from what's called scope 1 or 2 to scope 3, which is supply chain. Because suddenly they're getting their towers from a supplier, even if it used to be part of them, and. I think we probably need to spend some I'm not a carbon accountant, but I think some people should probably get the spreadsheets out.
The fact that there is such a thing, I think speaks volumes. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say
then I'll have my
the Scope 3 thing is fascinating to me, because Scope 3 accounts for about 80% of emissions, and over a huge part of that, they've got really no control at all. Actually, there's very little they can do about what customers are doing.
Because it's like several layers removed from them, isn't it?
The interesting thing for me is how other sectors of the tech industry are doing this. So one of the things that came out of PTC was the data center industry is taking this very seriously indeed. To the extent that there was one company that was put its data center next to a nuclear power station with excess capacity. There's another one that had a hydrogen powered nuclear mini data center. A few others. Even the subsea cable people were talking about the copper or the metal sheathing on the and how long their boats have got their engines switched on while they're doing the cable laying and all this.
I've said plenty of times on this pod that I'm deeply sceptical about ESG, which is environmental, social and governance.
Especially the S&G bit, that's even worse.
Which is what I just think of as sort of corporate virtue signalling / box ticking. And it's also got this sort of slight Klaus Schwab WF thing going on that freaks me out. Partly because he just presents as a Bond villain. Which
I'm much more like to speak in Davos than in Barcelona.
Is it?
Yeah, I trust WF much more than GSMA.
Blimey. God, that makes
me feel better about writing my.
You have that in common with Keir Starmer. I think Keir Starmer was asked a difficult question the other day whether he'd rather be in Parliament or Davos, and he went Davos, and he got beaten up about that. But I've said it before. I don't think public companies are capable of having a moral compass at all. All their incentives are obvious. Their share price, their fiduciary. There's all that stuff. And I was chatting to at one of these things we went to last week. Our colleague Teresa was out, and I was going off on this rant, and she was pushing back a little bit, and she gave a good pushback. She went, "Yeah, but if good shit gets done anyway, even if it's done for cynical purposes, isn't it good in and of itself?" And I was like, "Yeah, fair point."
Yeah.
My issue isn't with the actions; it's with. I always think of myself as an antagonist to marketing departments. And, and if they're going to, it's like, something bad happens, like Ukraine happens, or the earthquakes in Turkey happen, and then someone goes, we're 0 rating, or we're giving free, or we're finding a way of helping these poor, beleaguered people out. I think it's great, but as soon as they turn it into a press release, it just rankles with me, because I think you're making basically commercial capital out of this. Otherwise, why are you sending it as a press release? Why not just do it and not publicise it? But anyway, and I think that about a lot of the green stuff, which is why I like stories like yours. I don't think you'll claim that pointing out the hypocrisy of flying on a private jet to talk about how green you're the first person to do it.
No, I know.
But it's a point well made, and they shouldn't be allowed to get away with it, because it is hypocritical. And the same goes for.
I just wanted to have a bit of fun with the writing of it, really.
Well, quite, and it was good fun. And I've heard people completely unprompted just tell me how much they enjoyed it. And back to my trolls on that story. Sometimes we write stuff because we fucking feel like it, because we think it might be entertaining.
Yeah.
But yeah, the only thing that stops me, like if I go to Mobile World Congress and I hear a lot of green/ESG stuff going on, the only thing that stops me from writing too opinionated stuff is you don't want to come over like the Grinch. You don't want to come over like the complete dick in the situation.
Yeah.
And not acknowledge that the good things they're doing are good to some extent.
And I think there's a lot of good stuff that is happening. Where I draw the line is there's some very dodgy use of sort of metrics like energy per gigabyte, which usually then feed into the so-called fair share debate and a bunch of other stuff.
Which we keep kicking down the road.
Well,
we'll get on to next.
I think that the whole energy thing acts against them on this fair share thing, because if you look at so the argument that people like Vodafone and Telefonica, I think, have come out with quite publicly is that energy per gigabyte is the way they want to do it has gone down dramatically. Yeah. And if you look at the overall energy consumption in Europe, it's actually quite steady. Yeah. The only reason that they're spending more at the moment is because prices have gone up. And these are two. I mean, the cost side of it, I think, is almost. It's not my main reason for not liking this argument, but if you look at the cost side of it, they're not spending any more in capital intensity. It's gone up like 1%, over the last 6 years or something, while we're building out a new mobile network.
And the amount of energy. The variable energy use, or the variable cost per gigabyte, particularly on fixed, but also on mobile, is very small. Yep. It's mostly in the concrete that holds the tower up, and the metal framework, and the electronics, and the fact that you've got to keep the router on powered on, whether there's a gigabit a second or 0 going through it. Yep. Yeah, I mean the ridiculous thing is the day before launch of any network, there's 0 traffic, which implies infinite energy per bit, and.
Well, and I think that is. Like to finish off on the tangent I went off on, I'm totally in favour. Anything that's technological, if you can do the same thing for less energy, or you can do more for the same energy, then what's not to like? It's only when they introduce a moral, ethical, virtue signalling element that I rankle. Like one little example, last night when we were at this Gojira thing, they're quite socially conscious, these French guys. And they like to sing
Except
about...
for making your ears bleed.
No, I mean, again, I don't mind, but they like to sing, and they've got some songs about ecology. And my son, who introduced me to this band, I'd never heard of them before. I'm still stuck with fucking Metallica and Pantera.
So
and
they're young
like
guys, are they? They're not sort of...
Well, they're post my era, but I'm 51, aren't I? And I just said to him, I'm being a bit of a killjoy. I'm going, bear in mind, when you go to a live gig, there's the sound, there's the people in there, there's the lights. They were shooting off streamers and all kinds of extra shit like chaff to add to the effects. And I went, Jack, they're using a bit of energy now coming out of this message, aren't they? And he sort of went, yeah, good point. And so everyone's always a hypocrite, which is, I think that's the biggest reason. Apart from the fact that it rankles, I don't like PR and marketing cheap wins from virtue signalling. Everyone's always a hypocrite. No one's perfect. Yeah. And no one can claim to be perfect when it comes to eco stuff unless they walk to Barcelona.
Well, I did own up to being a hypocrite in my piece.
Yes, you
So,
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, as am I.
As
But I
well.
don't virtue signal. Is the only difference. Nor do you.
Yeah. It's like I'm not going to Barcelona. I went to Honolulu instead. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We keep. I mean, we're past the time when
Yeah.
I'd vowed I was going to stop it, but we've got one more topic that we keep kicking down the road. So let's do that and make our final topic. And it's actually relevant to a breaking news story that came out today. This is to do with the sort of fair contribution type of thing, which for people who aren't familiar with it, it's an argument from European operators and people representing them that most of the data traffic that goes over their networks is driven by American sort of subscription video on demand people like Netflix and Amazon and YouTube and that sort of thing. And so since they're using most of the resource, they should chip in for it. And it may well come to
Using it.
yeah, well, exactly.
So I have an objection to that whole way.
Well, we've had that, and we'll get into that. I'm just framing it, and then I'll hand it over. I'm going to hand it to Dean first, partly because we've got a prior pod that I think I remember him sort of remarking on Twitter.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've had discussion, and anyway, Europe's just announced that it's got that. You know how Europe likes to have these grand strategies and looking into it, and they've just announced the thing. I don't really know it that well because it was all breaking while I was getting ready for the pod, but it does look like they're going to consider trying to put some kind of legislation in where they can force American hyperscalers to chip in. So Dean, what do you think about that? And also, if you can remember back to the podcast we did with Rosalind Layton at the start of the year, where we spoke about that, you didn't seem to completely agree with that. So if you can give us some of your views.
Well, there's two slightly linked but different things. There's the so-called fair share, the payment contribution, and there's net neutrality, which we've been around the houses on multiple times. And Rosalind was in town for a net neutrality event. On the fair share side of it, there's so many fallacies in the argument. And to be fair to the European Commission, they're rather than leaping straight to legislation on this, they're now doing a consultation and questionnaire. Now, you could make an argument that the way they framed it is to get the answer that they want to get out of it, but at the same time, at least they're encouraging participation, and they're going to get it from lots of different quarters over appropriate time. The argument is that a share, it was above 50%, rather embarrassingly it's now below 50% of internet traffic, and this is internet access traffic, comes from...
I like that it's gone below 50%.
Yeah, a certain number of big services, Netflix, Amazon, and a bunch of others. Now, to be perfectly honest, I can't see the difference. If I'm watching a movie, it doesn't make any difference if we all three of us watch a movie from Netflix or we each watch it from separate sources. Yeah. We're still and the point here is that we, the user, is generating the traffic because I click the button saying, send me, I want to watch the movie. Yeah. The internet works not by people sending stuff, we can debate about adverts and updates and stuff, but by you requesting it. So the generator, in fact, if you think about it, YouTube is user-generated content.
Yes.
Yeah, it is by definition user-driven. They're hosting it. And to some extent, it's a mischaracterization to say that these companies are generating traffic, particularly also Amazon and Google, where they've got both their video streaming services and they've got cloud services with thousands of companies using AWS, including the telcos. So if I go to a telco-hosted cloud core, whose traffic does that get counted as? Is that Amazon's or is it the telcos or both? Anyway, we'll park that one for now. The other thing is that the costs of networks are very little to do with traffic volume or tonnage, and especially on fixed networks and to some extent on mobile networks, that's very true. And even on mobile networks, you have to double click. I've got a big problem with people using these big, there's this number of petabytes per month for the whole country, whereas in fact in certain places it's very thin. And actually, a lot of the cost goes in building out coverage in rural areas, even if there's one man and a sheep using it. You've still got to build the cell tower with all the concrete and everything else, and the capex. And also, you need to separate out things like fixed wireless from mobile broadband. And there's also a lot of design decisions taken by the operators, which were poor architectural decisions, which have generated costs for themselves, which is not really incumbent upon others to pay for. So I think there's a long list of arguments. And I think perhaps one of the killer arguments against this type of model is, at the moment, the average traffic on a broadband line is sort of 2 to 4 or 5 megabits a second. And frankly, if the operators aren't making money at less than 10 megasecond, why are they pitching and building gigabit networks with the opportunity to lose 100 times more?
Yeah,
because that doesn't make sense, even if someone else is.
And actually, I've when you haven't been on the pod, but we've been talking about this. I remember. Do you remember we met up, I think, last summer at an Orange thing in King's Cross, and you and I just went off on a tangent chatting about this, and I don't know if you heard that pod, but I gave you credit for flagging that up to me. They built the fucking networks anyway. It's a bit cheeky for them to then retroactively go, well, some people are using them.
Yeah,
they should pay more.
Well, I suspect if the operators were in all sorts of growth areas and 5G revenues are going up like this, and big tech companies didn't exist, and internet traffic was dispersed a lot more widely, let's say across 2,000 or 3,000 companies, we wouldn't be having this discussion. It's opportunistic.
It's opportunistic.
They don't like the fact that there's a few big companies doing very well when they're not.
And I know I took you to task for using pipes, but I've got to say, basically,
I still defiantly use the metaphor.
All right then. All right, we're dumb. Please tax the clever people for us.
Yeah.
This is what it boils down to.
Well, and in the past, when I've had some fun, I've called it telecom socialism. It's just wealth redistribution.
But,
in fact, I think you've even used a picture of a Che Guevara flag.
And even then, you have to, all those wealth, if you're going to do it, you have to net it out against all of the dead streaming companies, which VCs and investors put billions in, and then disappeared. You say, the market cap of these companies is huge. Yeah. What about all the negative market cap?
They're the 1%.
I mean, I'm conscious we're all sort of agreeing with each other on this issue. So, I mean, if you were to play devil's advocate and say, if you look at like the equity analysts who cover the sector, they say, well, none of the operators are making, they're not covering their weighted average cost of capital in most European countries. They do have to invest, when you get, I know it's mainly coverage, it's not mainly capacity, but if you do get a big capacity increases, you do have to spend more money on new servers and things like that. And if it just carries on going up exponentially, then
it's not.
And the operators don't make more money because they're in a flat market where subscribers aren't paying anymore, then what do they do?
Well, the first thing is this lie of exponential, right? Is growth is not exponential. And I would ask you, next time someone claims it is, ask them to define mathematically what an exponential is, because actually the growth rates are slowing, they're not increasing for both mobile and fixed traffic, and in some cases, a couple of cases have even started going backwards. The other side to this is the UK. We've got 150 fibre altnets who have, in the last 3 years, raised money and started building fibre networks in the full knowledge that people watch Netflix.
Yep.
Right, so there's all of these companies and their investors in the absolute knowledge that people will use these quotes pipes for video streaming. That's
you
all
keep
right.
Using it, don't you?
Here's a few
You're
billion.
Stop slagging me off about pipes. You keep fucking using it.
Here's 20 billion. There are actually physical ducts you got to put in. So I'll give you the dig a hole.
You're going with the metaphor. Don't give me that.
Plastic. Yeah. But there's people who've basically committed £20 billion in the full knowledge that that's what they're going to get used for.
Well, quite, and for them to then retrospectively go, hold on a sec.
Well, actually, it's not them; it's the altnets. The big companies now are spending less on this. Yeah.
So, do you think? Because I'm about I know. About 6 months ago, when I think Thierry Breton announced that he was going to have another butchers at this, which is the precise language he used, being French. Yeah. A French Cockney.
In it.
Boucher.
Boucher.
Right.
Yeah, that actually translates quite well between the languages, doesn't it?
Is he French?
I think
with a name like Thierry
Well,
Breton.
I thought maybe he was Belgian.
Yeah, it's the fucking same thing, isn't it?
It's not really a country.
Oh, well, he went there.
Oh, dear.
Anyway, when he announced about 6 months ago that they were looking into it, there was also a lot of stuff that said that, there's been an EU view on this going back decades where they've just gone, nah, it's not happening. But I'm just getting a sense that they're getting keen on the idea.
They are, but the thing is, there's so many unintended consequences. I mean, one is like, they come out and say, right, Google, you've got to, or Amazon, you've got to invest in infrastructure. One of them's going to turn around and say, all right, we're buying Cellnex.
Yeah.
Right, there you go. How much infrastructure do you want?
Yeah.
We own it. By the way, they now pay us. How'd you like them apples?
Yeah. This is why I think this whole thing's a bit like, careful what you wish for, guys.
Yeah. Or actually, you know what? you're right. And 80% of wireless users in Jaws, we will give everyone a free Wi-Fi 7 access point as long as you, the European regulators, give us the 6 gigahertz we've been asking for. Sorry, mobile operators. Yeah. There's 100 ways where they can, if they want to fuck with it, they can.
Do you see? I mean, in terms of where it's going to go, how do you see them? Because I've not seen anything sensible even in terms of how you would charge them or how this is measured. And
again, the lawyers make lots of money. My guess is that it comes out with, the recent thing about M&A and cross-border consolidation.
Yeah.
Is that gets the sort of, tell you what, we'll do this and we'll do a little bit of something. Yeah, we'll set up a universal service fund or something like that. There'll be some sort of fudge there. I don't think the idea that Amazon is going to be writing checks to Deutsche Telekom. At the same time, Deutsche Telekom is writing checks to Amazon or Google for
and
its
even if they
cloud
did
service.
it, I mean, presumably there's legal recourse for these big US.
What if they don't pay? What are the telcos going to do?
Yeah, well, it's that as well.
Are they going to cut them off?
And the other thing is they seem to forget what came before streaming services, which was peer-to-peer. So is it like, all right, you know what, we're going to go back to Napster and you do it for video now. Here's the open source software. End users, help yourself. You're sending the traffic, not us.
Yeah.
And here's the licensing mechanism.
So having said I'm going to keep it shorter, we're getting up to the 2-hour mark. So I'm not going to apologise this time because there was so much to talk about, and Dean's a great guest.
Are we up to the 2-hour mark already?
We are. We're about 10 minutes short, I think.
Wow.
About that? Yeah, 10, 15 minutes short. So I'm going to...
Sometimes it's just too good.
Well, exactly. It's worth going with. So sorry, everyone who thinks it's a bit long. But hopefully you'll agree. I think there probably have been times in the past where we've let a topic run where maybe I could have stepped in and gone, OK, I think we've more or less covered that.
Yeah.
But this time, I think we covered about 1 million topics. So I'm unapologetic. So just deal with it.
One last thought on MWC. We don't need to wear masks, do we?
No,
I don't
pretty
think
sure
so.
not.
I don't think so. I mean, I've still got that anecdote. I'm sure I've told on the pod before.
Well, I didn't even do the certificates. I mean, that seems to have gone. Doesn't
No,
it?
there's none of that.
Checking in at
but they were more uptight than the rest of Spain.
Although last time I was in Spain, you still had to wear them on the metro.
Yes, I did as well. The Fuse in November, you still wore them on the metro in Madrid.
Jesus
Yeah,
Christ.
and probably they'll have that in
I had that one thing last year at Mobile World Congress. Remember, we all went out, John Strand was out with us. We were all drinking one of those little AstroTurf beer gardens on the elevated bit. And then they chucked us out about 7, and I just really needed a slash. I thought, where can I go? And I went, I'll go into the press centre. I tried to get in, and one of these little 18-year-old... Yeah, 18-year-old... well, I won't characterise them too harshly.
Majordome.
Yeah, these 18-year-old motivated young people just said to me, hold on a sec, what are you here for? And I was like, I just need to go to the toilet. And they went, nah, you can only come in if you're picking up a bag. And I went, all right, I'm picking up a fucking bag. And then he went, go on then. And I went and had a slash and came out, and he went, what are you doing? You can't just do what you want. I went, well, I just did, mate. And that was that. So hopefully it won't come to that. I don't want to antagonise these nice young Spanish people, but if they're getting between me and the bug when I've just had a few, something's got to give, hasn't it? So there we go. All right, look, let's let's wrap it. I know we cut that fair contribution thing a little bit short. But I'm trying to train myself. You know, other people who do pods or like old school news, they'd like cram a massive topic into 1 minute.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find that compromise between
really badly though.
What they would.
Well,
I think that's so. But I'm a big fan of completely letting the conversation run. Yeah. But I'm just trying to teach myself some techniques for introducing a little bit of structure. So on that note, I'm gonna bye. I don't see you later. So yes, if anyone's listening to this and they bump into me at Mobile Congress and want to tell me how great we are on the podcast, then feel free.
Don't bother.
Yeah, if you think it's shit, then just don't bother.
You can tell him how great I am as well, because I'm not going to be there.
Yeah. Well, you can talk about how this is the best podcast you ever heard. But thanks again, Dean. That was brilliant. It was good fun.
Cheers,
and yeah, sometime, hopefully before the next Mobile Congress, we'll get you on again. And thank you, Ian. And yeah, so next time you hear from us, we'll be shooting one from the show floor. God knows what that's going to be like. It's always utter chaos. But that'll be the next one you hear in about a week's time. We'll have done from Barcelona. So until then, I hope you enjoyed this and join us for that one.